Hey, what's going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle coming to you from the Draft.com studios, talking waiver wire week 2 on this episode of the Fantasy Headliners. And this week was dominated by big play wide receivers. But with that being said, they were not big named wide receivers. A lot of performances that caught everybody off guard this week. And a lot of the players that had big performances were not overly owned in fantasy football leagues. Now, on this show, we take a look at players throughout the league that are owned in 50% or less of fantasy football leagues. So that's who we're going to be focusing on this week. Outside of big play wide receivers, a few Washington Redskins making their appearance on this week's episode, mainly because their team had the least amount of drafted players for any team in fantasy football this year. So they are going to be hopping on pretty big this week for a couple of different players at least. But we're going to talk about all of these players right now. We're going to jump into it. Quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. One thing I want to caution everybody, though, with this episode, okay? It is only week 1. Plenty of time left in the season. Please do not overreact because you had a bad week, all right? Don't do it, okay? Stay true to yourself. Stay true to the process. You followed the process for a reason. You have this team for a reason. Unless you've had an injury or unless you've had a guy that you just don't think is going to get it done, don't go crazy dropping a bunch of people just to add these names because they had one huge week. Things could change. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about whether or not you should be putting a waiver claim in with them. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about quarterbacks first. All right, 2 quarterbacks to talk about this week. Both had very good weeks, which were probably surprising to a lot of people, considering one of them shouldn't have even been on the field this week had it not been for an injury. Gardner Minshew from the Jacksonville Jaguars, Case Keenum from the Washington Redskins. The only real reason that we should be taking a look at these quarterbacks is it super flex or a 2-quarterback league? If it is a 1-quarterback league, you're going to be able to find plenty of other waiver wire options, especially if you had Nick Foles and he went down with his injury and that was the guy that you were expecting to start for you, but more than likely you were not relying on him as a starter either. So for both of these guys, very low ownership percentages, but only super flex, only 2 QB leagues. They had good performances this week, don't get me wrong. However, in a 1-quarterback league, let's not anticipate those performances to move forward to be something we want leading our team. 2-quarterback superflex leagues, we'll take a shot at them. Put in a waiver claim if you really need to go forward. If you're missing Nick Foles, or if you only had 2 quarterbacks and you want to add a 3rd quarterback, then take a shot at Case Keenum. The one thing with Case Keenum is he performed more than well enough this week to hold off Dwayne Haskins, who is looking to come in and take that spot. However, Case Keenum is fully cemented as the starter right now. A good performance in week 1 for him. He'll continue to move forward as a starter. We'll see what happens with the coming weeks with these 2 quarterbacks. I don't expect these types of performances to continue, but at least for 1 week, very good performances from them. We'll see what week 2 brings. All right, keep in mind, we're only looking at players who are owned in less than 50% of leagues. So this week, not a whole lot to talk about at the running back position other than these 2 gentlemen. Now, Jamal Williams is not somebody that I'm going to put a waiver claim on this week unless I own Aaron Jones. That's the only reason that I would pick up Jamal Williams. Now, if you have plenty of running back depth and you were to lose Aaron Jones for any reason and you can look at your team and say, I'll be just fine, then you don't need to put on a claim for Jamal Williams. The thing that concerned me, Jamal Williams, he didn't have a great week this week, okay? It was not spectacular in any way, shape, or form. 7 touches, only 15 yards. 5 of those 7 touches were on the ground for 0 yards, so that gives you just a really good idea of just how ineffective he was. However, he still saw some plays. He was still on the field at times. And Aaron Jones a couple of times, especially one in particular, he came off the field. He looked to be in a lot of pain. This is a guy who has dealt with some injury issues in the past. We'll see what happens, but Matt LaFleur even talked about needing to establish the run better next week. So if something were to happen to Aaron Jones, you want to have Jamal Williams readily available in case you need to put him in your lineup. Again, if you have more than enough options at running back, and if you lose Aaron Jones, you can look at your roster and say, I'll be just fine. Then do not put in a claim for Jamal Williams. But if you have the space and you own Aaron Jones, I encourage you to grab Jamal Williams this week and hold on to him for a couple of weeks to see what happens. Now with Chris Thompson, He had a pretty good week. I talked about him on the live show on Saturday and Sunday about being possibly a good play for deeper leagues, for PPR leagues, even for DFS lineups. And he ended up having 3 carries for 10 yards and 7 receptions for 68 yards. Now, the reason he became an interesting play, even more interesting than what he was before and moving forward, was the fact that the Washington Redskins were willing to basically sit Adrian Peterson this week. He was a healthy scratch. He didn't even dress this week. So with that being said, what's going to happen moving forward? Well, the Washington Redskins, they played pretty well. But moving forward, they're probably going to have to play from behind quite often. This team isn't that great. The offense looked a lot better than anticipated, but the defense is still going to have some issues moving forward. If they're going to be playing from behind a lot, that's going to offer Chris Thompson an opportunity to get out on the field more. Now, even with Darius Geis being the main guy, and they have said he is the main guy, Chris Thompson still made a pretty decent impact in the passing game. We'll talk about some other options in the passing game moving forward, but Chris Thompson could really be one of those guys that is second or third in targets on this team. And in PPR leagues, that's enough for you to consider him as a flex play every single week. So if you're thin at running back, if you did like a 0 running back type of strategy in your draft, then Chris Thompson is going to be a guy that you want to take a look at and stash for this week. Only 18% owned, so you're going to be able to get a hold of him in most leagues. Take a look, see what happens. He could be a guy that puts up decent volume and is a good flex play moving forward. All right, I mentioned it at the start of the show, right? Big play receivers was the name of the game this week, even though it wasn't really big name wide receivers who did it. Let's talk about the first one on the screen there. John Brown, 35% owned. If you watched the Waiver Wire show last week, he was the guy that I brought up and I talked about quite a bit. His big playability, 17 yards per reception, 4th in the National Football League last year. His ability to get down the field, Josh Allen's big arm, the ability to throw down the field. Well, that connection that I talked about last week really came to fruition in week 1. 7 receptions, 123 yards, and 1 touchdown. Every single week, John Brown is going to be a big play target for Josh Allen. Keep in mind, last year with Joe Flacco, before Lamar Jackson took over, who did just fine this past weekend, but before Lamar Jackson took over last year, John Brown was a wide receiver 2 in all fantasy football formats. Invest in him because he's got at least wide receiver 2 upside, I believe, this season. He could have some weekly wide receiver 1 upside when he's facing some lower end defenses and some back and forth or a very negative game script for the Buffalo Bills. A lot of that could be in his favor this year. So I definitely think he has the capability to be a wide receiver 2 in all formats, and he's going to offer you a lot of big play upside. You want him on your team, even if it's just stashing him on the bench right now and waiting for the bye weeks to deploy him. Now for number 2, Marquise Brown. That was quite a connection between Lamar Jackson and Marquise Brown this week. Now, I love Lamar Jackson. He was my quarterback 3 last week. I talked about him extensively. Marquise Brown is not a guy that I've been on. He is forcing me to pay better attention. But again, it was the Miami Dolphins. This is a team that is going to struggle a lot this year. They're not going to be able to stop a whole lot of people. So I just ask you, pump the brakes a little bit on Marquise Brown. Should you take a shot at him? Yes. If you need help at wide receiver, yeah, only not even 30% owned, only 28.2% owned. But the one thing to keep in mind, he was 147 receptions, or 100. Wow, that's a lot in 1 week. 147 yards on 4 receptions and 2 touchdowns. He is the first player in NFL history to catch 2 touchdowns of 40-plus yards in their debut, okay? So there was a lot of things working for him this week. Often, our defenses are going to pay much better attention to him moving forward. He is going to have that big playability, but I still believe that he's going to be a little bit more boom or bust moving forward. Again, though, a guy that you can grab, put on your bench, and at least hold for right now. I wouldn't necessarily run and grab him and throw him out there next week unless you absolutely feel necessary to. Again, the guys that you drafted to start the year, you drafted them for a reason. Don't give up just yet. Our third player, our third wide receiver to talk about here, DJ Chark from Jacksonville, 11.8% owned, 146 receiving yards, 4 receptions, a touchdown. Foles is going to be out a while. So we talked about Minshew to begin with. What is going to happen with him moving forward? Now, Chark has some upcoming matchups that are not going to be nearly as favorable. That Kansas City defense isn't great. Okay, they're prone to give up a lot of big plays. We saw that last year, right? not going to be quite as favorable moving forward. So of the 4 wide receivers I have listed here, Shark is probably the one that I'm the least interested in owning, because don't forget, D.D. Westbrook is still there. D.D. Westbrook can show up at any point in time. Didn't really have that type of a game this week. So, I would pump the brakes on Shark. I know a lot of people are going to want to run out and add him right away, but keep in mind that even Chris Conley had a good week. Chris Conley, 6 receptions, 97 yards. D.D. Westbrook found the end zone as well, 5 for 30. So this is going to be a team that spreads the ball around quite often, but when they get into a game that's going to be more positive game script, we're going to see a lot more Leonard Fournette. The defense isn't that bad. They just played a really, really, really good offense this week, and Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. So again, it's not going to be nearly as favorable moving forward. I'm not really going to take a shot on Shark this week, but I know that he's going to be widely considered by a lot of owners, so I wanted to make sure that we talked about him. And finally, last but not least, Terry McLaurin from the Washington Redskins, 7% owned. Okay, this is a guy that nobody was really buying into because nobody was buying into the Washington Redskins, right? 5 receptions, 125 yards, 1 touchdown. He's probably, outside of John Brown, he is the one that I will take the shot on the most this week. Again, Marquise Brown, he has the upside, he has big play potential, but Terry McLaurin is a guy that I really like because he's the one guy that could legitimately be the wide receiver 1 on his team from now till the very end of the season. And this is also a team that could be playing from behind a lot. Now, if Marquise Brown hadn't had those big plays this week, what would have happened? What would a stat line look like? This is going to be a Mark Ingram type team, especially if the defense continues to play well. This is going to be a team that will also run the ball a lot more. Lamar Jackson didn't really do anything on the ground this week. They're gonna move back to that a little bit moving forward, especially when they play some teams where they're gonna have to switch it up a little bit. They're not just gonna be able to throw it on consistently. So, with that being said, Terry McLaurin is the guy that I'm definitely investing in this week because he is the one player that, number 1, wide receiver 1 on his team, and negative game script quite often. He's got the big play potential. He can do a lot of things after the catch. So he's the one guy that if I had to, outside of John Brown, invest in at wide receiver, he's going to be my guy this week. Definitely take a shot at him. I probably wouldn't use a waiver priority of like 1, 2, or 3. I want to continue to try and hold that. However, if you have a mid to lower end priority, then I would take a look at it. If you're going to be bidding some sort of fab, wouldn't really go much more than maybe 10 or 15% at most if you really need a wide receiver. But there's a lot of options this week. A lot of players that had big games that were not widely owned. 4 of those players are right here. All right, not much to see it tied in this week, but I wanted to throw at least one name out for you, and it's Vernon Davis. And it seems whenever Jordan Reed misses time, Vernon Davis plays well. Well, 4 receptions, 59 yards, and a TD. And not only was he playing well, he was out there leaping and bounding. A really nice catch, jumping over a tackler, taking the ball to the house. So Vernon Davis continues to be not only in the league, but performing when he gets an opportunity. And that's the reason we have a lot of Washington Redskins on this show, is because, number 1, they had a really good week, obviously, in terms of offense. They were able to keep up with Philadelphia. They played well. Will it be that easy moving forward? Probably not. They're probably not going to play as well. But still, though, it's interesting to see because outside of Darius Geis, no one was really considered on this team except for Jordan Reed. And, he's dealing with some concussion issues right now. So we'll see what happens moving forward. But Vernon Davis, only 0.6% owned. If you play in like a tight end premium league, you could maybe stash him, especially if you drafted Jordan Reed to maybe be your main option. I know not a lot of people do that because he is so injury prone. But if you've lost Jordan Reed for any reason, you could take a shot at Vernon Davis. If you're in a premium league or if you're in a league, there are some leagues that require 2 tight ends to start. Vernon Davis is an option to look at as well. Probably not really going to be picked up much this week, but like I said, I just wanted to throw an option out there for tight end this week. Keep an eye on it, see what happens moving forward. He could potentially be a nice streaming option when we have, or if we have any injuries or when we get to bye weeks moving forward. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Week 2 waiver wire targets out of the way. Now go out there, get your waiver wire claims in. Again, though, do not overreact to week 1. It was a crazy, crazy week. There was a lot of big name players that didn't have good weeks. There was a lot of low name players that had huge weeks. Okay, again, we trusted the draft process, right? You trusted yourself. You felt good with your team. If you did, Don't give up on them just yet. However, we can make small improvements, make adjustments moving forward. Get your waiver wire claims in. If you have questions, obviously leave them in the comments below. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. But when waiver wires come through, do what you need to do to help your team, move it forward to next week, and let's all go out and get ourselves a win in week 2 of the fantasy football season. Make sure that you hit that like button. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Again, if you have questions, let us know in the comments below. Thanks so much for your support, Headliner Nation. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.